Hello, welcome to the 9 most interesting concepts from Tarkir, and we are not doing necessarily a top 10 for this, because sometimes there just aren't enough interesting topics, and sometimes there are more than 10, so it doesn't really matter, doesn't make the set bad, but I just want to look at the new things today, and of course starting with the most interesting one, at least to me. I never start with the least interesting, because at the point where you start feeling like they are not interesting anymore, maybe switch off. But most interesting to me is not a dragon, weirdly, it's Steward of the Harvest. It's a pretty big human druid that says, most interestingly, the creatures you control have all activated abilities of all land cards exiled with this creature. So maybe there are ways in which you can break this mana-wise, or maybe there are ways in which you can win with the actual effects on those cards. So how do you get the lands exiled? That is true. Well, when it enters the Steward of the Harvest, you get to just exile 3 target land cards from your graveyard. Does mean that you need to get those lands into your graveyard. So that's a bit of a bump there. But should be fun, and the most fun way to me would be to have all of those lands that become creatures on their own and then make your creatures into just slightly bigger versions of themselves. Seems weird, but I think that is really fun. Just you can actually build a deck now where you are beating your opponents with llamas, and that would be my personal dream. But let me know how you would break it, because there are way more powerful ways to do this, but this is the most fun one to me. Next, not necessarily a new one mechanically, but I think this improves it massively because it is in the right colors now. The Haste archetype. Neriv, the Heart of the Storm, is one of the 5 spirit dragons of the set, the Mardu one, and I think Mardu is perfect for haste creatures. This one says, if a creature you control that entered this turn would deal damage, it deals twice that much damage instead. Doesn't even actually need to be haste, because as long as the creature is dealing damage in some way, doesn't need to become a damage, that damage will be doubled. But I think the most stable way perhaps to use this is with haste. Of course, we have had Samut in Gruul, which would allow you to draw cards, and we had Gorogoro and Satoru in Grixis, where they give your creatures haste, and whenever one or more creatures you control that enter the battlefield this turn deals combat damage to a player, you create a dragon. So actually the more dragony type of commander, but I think Neriv really adds to the haste archetype by being in these colors, so that's basically its purpose here. Then Betor, the Ancestor's Voice, is a new addition to the big life gain archetype. We had Willow Dusk Essence Seer before in just green and black. That said, choose another target creature, put a number of +1 counters on it equal to the amount of life you have gained this turn, or the amount of life you have lost this turn, so did something else too, whichever is greater, so only one. But now we have a bit of an easier way of triggering it on a bigger creature, and we are adding another color. That where white definitely isn't the weakest color anymore, I would say. Betor says, at the beginning of your end step, put a number of +1 counters on up to 1 target creature you control, equal to the amount of life you gained this turn. So already does what Willow Dusk did. And return up to 1 target creature card with mana value less than or equal to the amount of life you lost this turn from your graveyard to the battlefield. So the life loss still is a thing that happens, but now you get 2 effects from it for a higher price. Well, just 1 mana actually, because you needed to pay the 1 extra mana for tapping Willow Dusk. Thing is, Willow Dusk could be untapped and then tapped again, so that is one thing you could do. And triggering at the end step is a little bit more difficult because you need to wait. But I think this is so much more value oriented, and you get another color, that I think this really improved the archetype. Another improved archetype is the Toughness Matters archetype, where Betor again returns as an interesting concept of just giving you value because you have enough toughness on the battlefield. And that is new because usually I felt like the Toughness Matters archetype was all about making sure your creatures could attack and making sure your creatures would deal damage equal to their toughness instead of their power. And that basically makes those creatures just normal creatures, but stronger slightly. And you still needed evasion, so it's just a lot there. I think this is a little bit more true to the archetype of just having creatures with big toughnesses. So Betor says at the beginning of your end step, if creatures you control have toughness 10 or greater in total, you draw a card, so not strong yet. But Betor already had 7 toughness, so that's pretty easy to get. Then if creatures you control have total toughness 20 or greater, untap each creature you control. And then if creatures you control have total toughness 40 or greater, now is the kicker, each opponent loses half their life rounded up. So in this way you can pretty easily, quickly get rid of your opponents, which is of course your goal. And Reunion of the House really added to it by saying, return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield, and exile Reunion of the House. But I think most interestingly, because you will have a bunch of creatures with 0 power, 1 power, 2 power in this kind of deck, Reunion of the House can definitely get back a bunch of creatures. I would hope a game-winning amount for this amount of mana, but still a strong effect. And another thing, I have been hoping that this archetype would kick off because it would really set the white color in its strength. Because Delny is a great commander, but I think isn't there yet. But Smile of Death does add to it. 5 mana, enchantment, at the beginning of your upkeep, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less, that's the archetype, from your graveyard to the battlefield, and put a +1 counter on those. But of course, returning 2 creatures with small powers should be interesting, because then you get the enter the battlefield triggers and you get to use those creatures again, of course. Another one, which I think definitely gives black as a color, as a monocolor, more strength, and I think that's needed because monocolor is fun to do but hard to make strong usually. But Sibsig Ceremony gets close, so 3 black mana pips, and then creature spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. So that is really strong. So you would say, why? Whenever a creature you control enters, if you cast it, destroy it. So seems like a downside because all of your creatures will be destroyed. Maybe you will need Indestructible to make this work or something. No, because then you create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So for every creature you play, you will get a 2/2 back. So one thing you could do is play really small creatures, but why would you do that? Well, you get 2/2s out of them. But the most interesting thing is that you need to find ways in which you can get value from creatures entering the battlefield and dying. So you can do that over and over and then get those 2/2s on the battlefield. So cards that, for example, can return to the battlefield every time they die as long as you have a zombie can be really strong here. Think about it. Sidisi is a new one. It has been done before, but now it works with the graveyard. What has been done before, the sort of evolution theme, where you sacrifice a creature and get one back with a higher mana value. So in this case, you tap Sidisi, sacrifice a creature, count the amount of mana value it has, then return a creature card with mana value X +1 from your graveyard to the battlefield. Only as a sorcery, but that means that you can grow your creatures every time, but you do need enough creatures in the graveyard, milled there or something, to be able to continue doing this. But this can definitely be broken. Dragons have been changed. Of course, we expected this from the set, but not the most interesting thing we have found. And because, well, how to change dragons? They are big guys that fly, strong enough on their own. But we have 2 other ways to break them now. Dracogenesis is 8 mana that, as an enchantment that says you may cast dragon spells without paying their mana cost. In this way you would need to find a way to still win, of course, but I think with dragons you can get there, and that would be the ultimate power fantasy. I mean, there are cards that exist that do this for all your spells, but I think it's cool that this only works for dragons because it's thematic and a way cooler way to win. And call the Spirit Dragons, which says if you can put 5 counters on dragons, on 5 dragons this with the call of the Spirit Dragons, you win the game. So how do you get there? Well, it's 5 mana, so 1 mana for each color. And then dragons you control have indestructible, so it will be easier to keep your dragons on the battlefield. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, for each color, put a +1 counter on a dragon you control of that color. So if you have a 5 color dragon, you can put 5 +1 counters on it. Doesn't mean you get to win the game, but it works that way. But if you have 5 dragons, each with one of the different colors that you can put the +1 counter on it, this way you win the game. So you need 5 dragons, perhaps you have red, white, blue, green, black dragon on the battlefield, or perhaps you have multicolored dragons or 5 colored dragons on the battlefield. Doesn't matter, if you can put +1 counters on 5 different dragons this way, you win the game. So I think that's a cool alternate win condition to play around. Speaking about those, I think Ugin is another one, but mostly because he is so controlling. 7 mana for an Endery Planeswalker. I don't know what that is, but it's an Endery Planeswalker. That says when you cast this spell, exile up to 1 target permanent that's 1 or more colors. So when you cast Ugin, you exile 1 target permanent that's 1 or more colors. Then whenever you cast a colorless spell, you also exile up to 1 target permanent that's 1 or more colors. So for every Soulwing that you play, and you will be playing a lot of them of course, in Commander, you will get to exile 1 target permanent that's 1 or more colors. And fun thing about Magic, most cards have a color on them. Yeah. The +2 is not too interesting, you gain 3 life and draw a card. But we want to +2 because eventually you get to the -11 and then you search your library for any number of colorless non-land cards, exile them, then shuffle, and onto end of turn you may cast those cards without paying their mana costs, exiling all of your opponent's things and making sure you have a bunch of things to play yourself. So Ugin is definitely a win condition that is new, that's really exciting, and that will be hateful to play against. And that was it for Tarkir. Let me know what your favorite is or which ones I have missed, and I am glad to be proved wrong by you, because I want to thank you for watching and have a nice day.